Hi, Melanie.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
It's Lindsay. Lindsay, I can't see you. I'm assuming you're there.
I am here, and consider yourself lucky.
Are we good to start going, or I'm
5, 6. Is there? Yeah, we have a quorum, so we can start.
okay? I like to keep us on time. Good evening. Hi, everybody. I want to call the meeting of the Keystone Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Today is November 20th. It's 5:31. I want to thank everyone for being here, obviously. And could we now have the secretary call the roll?
Commissioner Tim Hiding. Commissioner Steve Jacobson.
Here.
Commissioner David Koch.
Here.
Commissioner Peter Madlens.
Here.
Commissioner Kathy Robb. Commissioner Wendy Chen. Chair Melanie Wotash.
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Diane Leasley.
Here.
And Alternate Commissioner Callie Warren. Here. We have 6 members present.
Okay, so let the record show that we've got a quorum. And our next item then, of course, is approval of the consent agenda. Everybody's had a chance to look at it. Are there any corrections or items anyone would like removed from the agenda? If not, could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the minutes from last month's meeting, which was September 18th? And then, of course, our agenda item for tonight, which is our the initial draft of the comprehensive plan.
I'm ready to approve the consent agenda.
Can I have a second?
Second.
I'm so sorry, Mary. Who moved? Okay, thank you, Peter.
I'm not second.
Okay.
All opposed to, not all opposed, all in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved. And that brings us to our general business, which is a discussion of the very comprehensive plan. Should I first, Lindsay, ask you to set it up for Dylan, or is Dylan, or do we go right to Dylan?
We can, well, let me just say a couple words real quick.
Sure.
So this is the first time you've seen the initial draft. And I absolutely understand that it was probably, to some degree, very overwhelming to you. With that being said, Dylan put it the best way. Instead of not having stuff in it, although, you know, if we miss something, we'd like to hear, but it's like everything and the kitchen sink perspective. So we believe it is incredibly comprehensive, and it's easier to take things away than to actually put things in. Not that we can't, but that's sort of the philosophy. Let's throw everything out at you and get some good working discussions. But this is the first time we've seen the whole thing put together. Now, this is not the pretty picture one. This is a working, living document, but it's the first time we've seen it all put together. So with that being said, I believe Dylan has a PowerPoint to walk us through this. And again, keep in mind that a majority of what you're going to hear is what was heard from the citizens and from all the public input that we got. So with that, Dylan.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I definitely will acknowledge it's a lot. For sure. So I have a presentation. Mostly I'm using this as a way to help facilitate the conversation with you all, because the primary reason that I'm here is I want to hear what you want. I want to hear what your thoughts are. What did we get right? What did we miss the mark on? How can it be better? Because this is your plan. You all have to live with it. So I want to make sure that we're setting you all up for success. So in terms of what I have here prepared, first I want to go through some table setting on the draft document, and then kind of walk through feedback on the different sections, and then kind of like walk through maybe what some next steps could look like after today. So in terms of table setting, Steve and I were talking about this before the meeting started, but there will be an executive summary. So we're not expecting that every member of the public is going to read the entire document. There will be, a short, sweet executive summary that will be added to the document. We haven't gotten there yet because executive summaries, in my opinion, are best written after you've gotten all the other content right. So then you can, pare down and focus in on what you want to highlight there. This is, right now, this draft, think of it as like a tool for making sure that we're getting the messaging right. We've taken a lot of photos, we've got maps and graphics that we'll add to the final document. As Lindsay said, it'll be a very pretty version. It'll be laid out and look really good. That's what we're working towards, but for now, the draft that you all reviewed is mostly what's the content, the words on the paper that we want to make sure is resonating well and that the story is right. So figures, tables, graphics, they'll all be added. Maps and tables and charts, they might be resized as well. Once we lay it out in the final version, we have a lot more creative control over how things get laid out. So it'll look a little bit different. So just kind of setting for that. And also, I think it's important to flag, the state does require that all documents that are posted on websites be in compliance with visual accessibility, so they're able to be used by a screen reader. And so we'll also have to make sure that the final document is accessible as well. So that's something that we've been having to do on a few other plans. So we've got a bit of a rhythm going for doing this, but it is a relatively new thing. So just kind of, I think it's important to flag that as well. Any questions on sort of that?
Minor note on format. The original source documents are a mixture of various JPEGs or equivalent, as well as a Word document being the foundation.
Right.
So that'll be the primary thing that's delivered to the staff.
So the primary thing will be delivered to the staff. We'll give them a Word version that they can have all the back end of the text. We'll also give them a version that's made in InDesign, which is sort of like a report creation software. So graphic designers use it to make like magazines or journals or reports or plans. That's what kind of the stage we always go through is Word document first, and InDesign where we kind of lay it out and make it look really pretty and add graphics, tables, and all the images and the text together. So it's a way to consolidate it in a more user-friendly format. So that'll be kind of our...
And the output of that is a
PDF. Yeah, and so, we create a PDF from InDesign. So once the project is completed, we'll share all the information. And it basically in a folder with the team. So.
What's a call-out box?
That's a great question, yeah. So imagine like in a plan document, you've got sort of the main body of the text that's kind of the main narrative. And then, so the call-out box, an example of that would be, that we flagged in the draft document is the note on data availability. And so I think it's important that we flag that there's some limitations around the data that we were able to acquire in order to inform our understanding of your economic context, housing context, things of that nature. But it's not necessarily like central to the narrative in the document. So we'll have like it called out on the side that's just people can like reference that information, but not weave it within the main body of the document. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. All right, moving on. So the first section of the plan was sort of this foundation setting. And the plan contents were like this municipal governance and comprehensive plan. So like about what it is the municipal governments have sort of authority over, what is their sphere of influence. what do they have to rely on partnerships to do, and then what do they have to rely on sort of, good faith and goodwill to kind of pursue. And then about comprehensive plans, what is a comprehensive plan? And I know it maybe goes into a lot of detail, but this is the first comprehensive plan, and so I thought it was important to kind of lay the foundation kind of early on in this planning document, that as people that come after you and come after your current council and your current staff kind of build on this foundation, they have sort of that grounding information that they can always go back to. And just, kind of helping to level set, what is a comprehensive plan? I think it was actually, I was talking to a colleague, but I think it's actually an interesting exercise that I went through, because so often the communities that I'm working with, this is their 12th or 50th comprehensive plan. And so we don't have to get into that like description of like what it is the local governments have authority over and what it is a comprehensive plan does. I think it was actually a really good exercise for me. It's almost like going back to planning school, be like, what is it that we're doing here, right? So that was the contents. I have questions for you all, which was just what do you like and what do you dislike, what's missing and what could make it better. But I mean, what anything else that you all have to add, please?
I think it's a typo, but bottom of page 7, top of page 8, the 3 spheres of municipal authority, page 8, it then says county sphere.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I noticed that one too.
Okay.
Couple of general questions or comments. One is difficult because paging changes, and depending on the document, if you could get subsection numbering, not just section numbering, it'll be a lot easier to identify what piece you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you have more comments, it'll be easier for people to identify which piece we're talking about.
Perfect.
I absolutely love this style when you started getting into comments like generally this is true, and for Keystone specifically, this the blah blah blah. So it highlights the layering you were trying to invoke with regards to the federal level, the state level, et cetera. The same kind of thing happens in this, where you can get into that specific area where here's the general things we see at the highest level, and by the way, for Keystone specifically. So double thumbs up on that approach. I didn't see it everywhere, so I would encourage it.
Okay.
If you can get that in there.
Yep.
Another minor household thing, housekeeping thing, abbreviations and definition section. I know that's a little later, but
Sure.
I am the TLA kind of guy, and I get stuck in the 3-letter acronym world, and I get in trouble.
Yeah, the planning profession's acronym soup too, so apologies for any.
Yeah, there's 1 or 2 in there. I had to go over to Google
Yep.
and get a little help.
Yep. Well, actually, I have a quick question for you all. So one thing that we were identifying as a next step thing to add to the document is just a glossary of terms too, like what is affordable housing or what is inclusionary zoning?
You're reading my notes.
And so, I'm trying to get ahead of your comments.
Painfully, but usually.
So I was having this discussion with my colleague, and I'm curious about what you all think. So typically, like, we have like a glossary of terms maybe at the front, and it can be inclusive of all the sort of terms that we think we would on the flag. But something we were discussing is maybe there's a sort of chapter specific glossary of terms. So in let's say land use, maybe we have like, here's the 10 terms you might run into, and then in housing, here's like the 3 you might run into. So do you all have a preference for what you like better?
I like that one.
Okay.
I have a little window over the side and I have everything,
Okay.
but I don't know what everybody thinks.
Okay.
Peter, which one did you say you liked?
Everything in one place.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and I was gonna say I like the idea of it per chapter, so let's see.
I understand.
Would anybody else have a thought?
I think the writing is really good. It's
Thank you.
tight, it doesn't run on. And maybe just because I'm a planning type person, I really liked how you set the tone and the foundation and articulated it and tied it into also what state requirements are. And I mean, it puts it in perspective. We're this little 1,100 person town, but by golly, we're in Colorado and we're doing it right.
Yeah.
And I love the tone you set there.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just one, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Melanie.
Go ahead. Steve, was that you? Steve, do you have something?
Yeah, so I just wanted to expand. I know the executive summary is not done, but one of the things I thought, especially for the average person out there reading this thing, I think in the executive summary, I think it would be good for people to go, in your opinion, what are the positive things that you found out that will lead to success? And I hate to use the word costs, so I use the word challenges.
Sure.
And then list the things that are outliers for this community that maybe others don't, and list those challenges. And then I always like to give people, what are the 5 easy wins? So people feel like, hey, we can get something done. Because most people are going to look at this, going to be overwhelmed. But I always say, here's your easy wins. In your, not your professional opinion, what are the 3, the David one of the top 10 easy wins?
Yeah.
Whatever it might be, could be something as simple as improving the trails. It's up to you, but I think that would be good as you think through the executive summary.
Okay.
The other thing that I thought of as we were flying in, why are we not referencing K&C and how that plays into good and bad? I know there's a lot of stuff going on now in their world, but the funding of a lot of the things we're looking to do, or more activity in river running, more improvements, a lot of that right now gets funded out of K&C. I don't know, I don't care about the politics, I just care what's right for this community.
Sure.
So I don't know, are some of those going to transfer to the town, or are they going to continue to drive that? And if they are, we should talk about that. That's an issue here, without getting into politics, is what we can do to get them to be more active or to follow more along with this plan. Because if they're in conflict, because they collect a lot of money, they do a lot of stuff. So that was the one, that was kind of overreaching.
Yeah.
I agree completely with, and building on that thought a tiny bit.
Yeah.
There's, you mentioned the HOAs as the other entities, as well as, I remember what it's called, municipal, where a group gets together and it's a pseudo-governmental entity.
Like a quasi-jurisdictional,
yeah,
like a improvement district.
Yeah, improvement district or a metropolitan district, that's the word.
Yeah.
You might mention that this entity we have here is kind of a hybrid between the HOA and a metropolitan district.
Right.
And it might be a good place to add that little bit of extra, saying, by the way, there's another entity that is somewhat unique in some sense.
Yeah.
It's an HOA of HOAs, which is not super common.
Yeah, no, that's a really...
Because that was the governing agency, because when we were in Summit County, somebody had to be here locally running what a municipality did. And I have no idea how that transforms over time, but it's something I think we should say, this is what it is, this is what they do. They're going to have to engage in this process in a meaningful way, because they fund a lot of the activities that we want at River Run, or Lakeside, whatever. So,
yeah, no, I think that's important. Yeah, I think that's really important. I'll make sure to work with Lindsay pretty closely on how we want to make sure that we approach that topic.
And then one other comment that, so I may have missed it in all the charts. So you just great information. I learned a lot too.
Yeah.
When you're referencing household income, average age, you're ignoring the second homeowner. And I'm just wondering, that data, that revenue and income does affect what happens here, because that's kind of the hidden wealth or influence. And so I don't know the answer, but how do you account for that? Because when I look at it and I'm like, oh, Southern County's doing better than us and this and that, but when you compare like demographics of full-time residents, how do you handle people who don't live here full-time? But they make money, they're educated or not educated, they have kids or not kids. I just don't know how that plays into, or does it play into a master plan? Because it's a resource, good or bad.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask a question. So, in what ways in particular do you feel like do you feel like there's like the omission of the part-time perspective? I just want to make sure.
when, I think there's a perception when you see what there's a feeling when you read what the average HHI,
Sure.
and you see that number, you think that's the number.
Yeah.
There's some other number out there, and the wealth of the people, good or bad, some people like it, some people don't. I'm just talking about there is an impact that needs to be accounted for, because
Okay.
those people bring a different dynamic,
Yeah.
and some are here longer, some are here shorter. I've never looked at a chart that way, but as I'm retired now, so it will be more of a full time, but I just don't know. Does that change your perspective on how you look at things, I guess is what I'm saying?
Yeah, let me see if I can try and not make this a complicated answer. So there's part of the issue is a little bit of the data limitations, right? So a lot of like,
find that information out.
yeah, so the challenge is on household income that we source that data from the census. And so the census is, foundationally it's provided by the household surveys. And so people that, it's aggregate, in order to aggregate it to a geographic location like Keystone and be able to like understand what household income is here, we have to rely on their data. So their data is provided by, like, are they reporting their place of residence as Keystone? And so that's kind of how we're pulling that information. We can find out like part-time residents through the census data, and we can understand like the breakdown of people that are part-time or full-time. But I do think that there's a little bit of swirling that happens with regards to household income based on.
You absolutely need to add a footnote, and I have the same thought.
Yeah.
That talks about the limitations, and one of the key limitations is, or slight biases, or major biases, is this characteristic that says, by the way, we got this data from that, and by the way, that means if it's a third or fourth homeowner, and there's 2,000 of those, that would be a pretty hefty bias in a different way, like a bias of omission.
Right.
And I'd like to see it included.
He does
It's
have some
probably-
of that in the narrative.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
But maybe what you're saying is say it more often.
Well, just to impress upon, their point is that there's the second homeowner with only 17% of the 35 odd housing units here occupied full-time
Yeah.
by definition.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you ignore that group?
Yeah.
And so I just think you do need you need to weave it
Yeah.
into the narrative
That's
so
what I'm
that
saying.
it ends up in the recommendation and implementation plan.
Yeah,
It's just too
Especially in the income
influential.
piece, the bias is the numbers so severely.
And
Yeah.
listen, I don't know how to solve it, when I looked at it, and I'm just like,
Something's missing.
yes, there's a revenue engine here
Yeah.
that is missing everything else, because you can't get the data. I don't know how you find out what my HHI is. How would you find that out? You can't.
very difficult.
Yeah.
But I
Maybe.
can, so one thing I will say for the housing portion, it was very tricky going through the housing needs assessment process for this particular community, just because there's your housing stock is very different from a lot of other communities, and even comparable mountain communities, just in the sense that there's a lot of resort-owned seasonal employment based housing. Then there's also deed restricted housing with different types of limitations on it, and then there's full-time occupied housing, part-time occupied housing at different scales. And so we try to make sure that when we were doing the housing needs assessment, which did inform some of the housing pieces that we saw in this draft plan, that we accounted for those differences and those different types of groups, and how that actually factors into housing need, right? So we're not necessarily trying to account for things like what their resort should be providing in terms of housing for seasonal employment, and looking at, so we're trying to pull, and I know that's not necessarily directly answering your question, but we did try to, I think we're trying to back into other ways of looking at specific recommendations that are tailored to your community, even with the limitations of how.
No, I get it. There's a lot of, there's a task here that maybe is 20% achievable. I just think identify that, maybe that's one of the challenges, is knowing that it's there. And just knowing it's there, might be enough, but,
I mean, maybe,
Go ahead.
maybe, maybe a way that to kind of put all these thoughts together is that because of the limitation in data, when you're explaining, Dylan, at the beginning of your sections on data and how you use the census designated place info, I mean, maybe in that sort of setup to data, you could expressly say what the data doesn't cover, that the second and third homeowners are not captured by this sort of data. Just to acknowledge that we know there's a group of people that we don't have data for.
Sure.
We might be able to find some data from the short-term rental stuff too.
And also the AMI is heavily biased
Yes.
Very
in
much.
an extreme sense, in that
It's
you're ignoring maybe a small group or maybe even a fairly good-sized group who are extremely wealthy if it's a second or third home.
Right. Yeah, the AMI, so AMI or median incomes are what the state requires that we use.
I understand that. I don't have any
Yeah,
problem with
for
using it as long as we acknowledge various limitations in where we're using the data and have to manually, mentally accommodate it accordingly.
I think if Brian from EPS were here, he would say that what's the challenge with regards to using AMI is that when the state was designing the housing needs assessment requirements, a lot of what they had in mind were like front range communities, where AMI like brackets are. They tell a more cohesive story when your population is like 50,000+, or you've got less differences between people that are like second homeowners versus a seasonal ski instructor, and like those bifurcated differences in such a small population, you really skew AMI differences in a place like Keystone. And I think that like the use of AMI in like mountain communities is something we're continuing to see as a bit of a struggle. And I know that there's a group of mountain communities that are petitioning the state to amend some of the AMI brackets to account for the reality that 80% AMI in Denver is totally different than the AMI in Keystone or Breckenridge, and needing to make sure that that's accounted for. I don't know what the status of that effort is in petitioning the state, but it's something that's playing out currently, and it's probably going to be an ongoing thing that evolves over time with regards to how people address.
I think the second homeowner needs to be identified. They're clearly a stakeholder.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're broadly under property owner, but I'm looking here on page 13, for instance, and you have Keystone residents. Well, you know what? Maybe you say Keystone full-time residents and have another paragraph for part-time residents, because the summer months here, there are a lot of people that are here like 4, 5, 6 months of the year.
Yeah, that's a really good point. To that point, Wendy, one thing that since we last had a conversation, something that's changed. So we talked about the full engagement summary, which is again another really long document that I threw at you all. But that something that's changed since then is that town council asked us to break out the survey responses by full-time residents and part-time residents. So when people filled out the survey, they could indicate whether they were full-time resident, part-time resident, worked in Keystone but didn't live here. And so the engagement summary has been updated to reflect the differences in the responses to the community survey based on those inputs. So we have the data to be able to kind of create some of those distinctions, and we've done it throughout.
Yeah, it really it's a bigger constituency than the full-time folks.
Yeah, it was interesting to me when we separated it out. That there was generally a lot more overlap on things than I expected between the way part-time residents and full-time residents saw like Keystone and issues, challenges, and things that were going well. But I do think it was a helpful exercise in parsing out. This is what's really important to full-time residents versus this is what's really important to part-time residents.
One personal thing on that, if there's going to be kind of an appendix or a footnote or something to that effect, I'm simple-minded in a 130-something page document.
Yeah.
If it's a footnote, I'm going to ignore word probably, the
Okay.
first 10 times I read it. But if it's bold or highlighted or something that we're trying to say, this is, we recognize an important thing, maybe that's helpful.
Okay, yep, we can do that. And there will be appendices, so the needs assessment, the engagement summary, these are things that we'll make sure are included as appendices in the plan, because they get referenced throughout too, so I'm with you on footnotes, I'm not good at footnotes personally.
Sorry, yeah, so,
Dylan,
go ahead, Melanie.
yeah, Dylan, before you go on, I wanted to say I noticed throughout the report back to what we're discussing a minute ago about acronyms and the idea of having a glossary is one thing, but I noticed in addition throughout the report, there's times where an acronym is used and then like 5 pages later, the acronym is spelled out, the words are given and then the acronym is established. Like, so they're just not in the right order. And so I flagged those as I saw them. It maybe is something I should just email you or, because that would go a long way so that you're not using an acronym before explaining what it is, only to
Sure.
explain it 5 pages later.
Fair, yeah, fair enough, absolutely, please.
Would you like me is that the best way to do that, is to just email, or I don't know, what's the best way?
I'll forward it. That way I can track everything.
Yeah, we've been using Lindsay as the sort of clearinghouse for,
Okay.
for tracking information.
And then another sort of overall thing I had with this foundation section, I also thought it was really excellent. And I think it is helpful to sort of see where we fit in the greater scheme of things. But one thing that I noticed on page 9, you talk about architectural care. There's a discussion of architectural character. And when I read that, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, isn't that something that HOAs do? And then later on page 10, you do, the very next page, you do talk about HOAs. And so I thought maybe we should have HOA come earlier, or have and again, this is something we've talked a little bit about, something that more expressly discusses their role in this whole process.
Sure, no, I think that's interesting feedback. I think, but to your question about is that something that HOAs do, I think yes is the short answer, but also
Right.
it's something that local governments could do too. So in many ways, through the municipalities' land development regulations, zoning code, and building codes, which I know is handled in Keystone's case by Summit County, there are ways that you can influence architectural character and building design setbacks and things of that nature. So it is something that can be captured at a local government level, but also captured at the HOA level. I think what's maybe interesting about the way that we were trying to frame it in the foundational piece is kind of setting up the land development, land use and zoning chapter, in the sense that in Keystone's case, it is sort of this, there's two sides of it, right? Where there is the town zoning code and what you all have the ability to articulate and influence through your municipal regulations, and then also recognizing that HOAs are really kind of the primary influence around architectural character, at least in Keystone currently. So, yeah, but I think if it's helpful to sort of flip the ways in which we're introducing that information, that we can absolutely make that change.
Okay, super.
On the retail section, so I'd like it to be softened a little bit. So just because the spaces are occupied doesn't mean it's robust. So sure, I kind of heard that a lot of those tenants on percentage rent only or extra charges. So it doesn't mean the retail is vibrant there. And so I don't know how you find that out. I found it out through some other avenues. And so a lot of those tenants would not make money. The developer is not making the money because just the business isn't there. So I'd be a little careful to say that just because the space is occupied, this is robust retail, because it's not.
Sure.
Because I do infrequent, because I was in retail one time, I just go and talk to the managers at that time, just, how are sales back good? You know, so again, very informal, and I don't know what the numbers are, but I'll bet you a lot of them are percentage rent only.
Sure.
And then the problem with it, and I don't know how you fix this, but a lot of those spaces, storefront to depth, don't work. They just don't work based on conventional retail we see. And so the problem is with any mixed-use project, some use has to govern, and it was the condos. So you get the condos to work, so many per floor, but then you're left with a floor plate, and then they just kind of stunt retail where they can't.
Right.
Some is good, but some of the quarters and that. So I don't know how you fix that from a retail perspective. Maybe that's more service oriented, but just be a little careful. It sounded, in my opinion, being a retail, it sounded too positive. That it's doing better than what I think. My opinion.
Yeah, no, that's good feedback. Take that, for sure.
Go ahead.
If anybody else has, go ahead. This one's kind of a general question. It's actually to the whole group. In the user guide section, how should you use this comprehensive plan? You use what I call soft wording.
Sure.
Things like the plan's intention is to serve as a roadmap. And my brain says, why didn't we say the plan serves as the roadmap? The intention sounds like you are telling a bunch of suggestions to people who are going to decide whether that's going to be right. It's indirect and it's on. I wondered if everybody's perspective is, should we say this is the plan, have a nice, this is what we're planning on doing, as opposed to our intention is this, or we want to do this, or you can do this, as opposed to other words like should or shall or whatever that's a little more firm. I would prefer more firm because the lighter weight words imply we haven't taken the step of reviewing it, we haven't taken the step of accepting it, and the council hasn't said, yes, we're going to do this. So when you say these, what I call lightweight or soft wording, it implies a non-approved plan.
Okay. Yeah, this, to me.
And I understand where it came from.
Yeah.
At what point do we go from, we'd like to do this, to we should do this, to we are doing this?
My opinion is that it's kind of a matter of philosophy in some ways, and I think
That's why I'll
different communities take it differently. So I would say I'll follow the direction that you all feel is important.
Why have a plan if you aren't adopting it in the affirmative of this is who we are and this is what we're doing?
Well,
You
I
know?
had a little bit of a different perspective on that because when I read this, I thought, is this really going to get done in 5 years? No, it's going to take a lot longer. And some people will read this and think, this is what we think we're going to get done because we're calling it a 5-year comprehensive plan. And so I'm not exactly disagreeing with you, but I think parts of it, yes, definitely we want to do, but other parts of it are still, we're thinking way into the future with this plan. There's things that we can control, things we have money for, things we don't have money for, things we can't control. And so I didn't get as upset with the soft words.
Yeah.
But I actually, that's one of my questions is how do you let a reader who's not, deeply involved with this understand that this is the first step in trying to have the town that we want, knowing that we're not going to make it on everything we say in here.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess maybe one thing I can say is yet to be written and kind of in our next steps is an implementation chapter. And so implementation, it kind of looks different in different plans, and part of the reason it's still not taking shape yet is a little bit, there's in each of those different chapters, like land use, housing, environment, and parks, there's different recommendations that we have. you all might, different people might see different recommendations differently, but we don't, like, I think what we view implementation chapters, like what are the big picture things, like the top priorities that you might want to actually work on in the short run, and then what are some of the like timelines associated with that, who should be a responsible party, and things of that nature. So like, how does that kind of, how do these sort of recommendations kind of take a little bit more shape?
The
and
county
what does that look like?
chose to have an interesting layout, which I kind of liked, which was essentially addressing the sequencing of it, which ones need to be attacked
Right.
first,
Yeah.
and which ones are kind of the more longer term, et cetera. It adds a layer of complexity to everything, to say the least. But in your implementation section, you might talk about the, you know, which ones are the low-hanging fruit that we need to do ASAP versus whatever. In the RTEP process, definitely talked about those things are like step one, and, you know, or groupings of step 1, 2, but not getting too detailed because plans depend on money and depend on a whole lot of other things that we can't always, you know, have a good view of in the future.
Yeah.
And economic reality.
Yeah. Green grease.
I just wanted to add on the language. I mean, the whole document is called a plan. You know, it's a plan. It's not an action, you know, memo or something. So I thought that the wording was fine and made sense in a planning document, and it shows what, and even using words like it's our intention to do this, or here's options. I think that's what a planning, to me, it felt like the right way to phrase things, because like we've been saying, we don't know what kind of money we have. We don't know what is going to face us in the future as a town. So to be too strict in how we word things just risks the public looking at something and saying, well, you committed to doing X, Y, and Z, and now you haven't. It's much easier for us if we say that's what we're intending to do, or we believe we should do, and then if we can do it, we will.
I think it's a good point, Melanie. Yeah, I mean, for instance, maybe an example of, like, to Melanie's point could be that, you know, if you, or in the user guide, one of the roles that we called out was members of the public, right? And I think to them, their role is, you know, how can they use the plan to make sure that they're holding their local government accountable to, you know, and realizing the vision of their community. And, you know, to Melanie's point, we also need to be somewhat realistic about what you as a town can actually accomplish in 5 years. And I think it's important for us to flag, like, the litany of all the things that you probably should be trying to accomplish in the comp plan, right? And I think it's probably a more useful document to you to have an accounting of all the different things that we would recommend. But, you know, to Melanie's point, right, 2 years from now, you could be in earnest trying to make an update to your land development code. And then, you know, all of a sudden, a really great federal grant comes out to improve the intersection at Razor Drive. And Lindsay and Jess are like, well, we have to go for that. I mean, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We're really well positioned for it. You get the grant. That's a transformational opportunity to make actionable progress on another thing that maybe outlined in the plan. That, you know, you wouldn't want to pigeonhole yourself into saying, you know, we shouldn't necessarily exclude going after things that are important for us at the behest of following some, you know, sequential.
In the how you use it section, you could just simply add a key piece in the staff and the town council prioritize or reprioritize those things that are defined as options within this plan. And that by itself up front early would accommodate what Melanie's talking about, and also talk to my consideration also, I would think. I'm just hoping discussion.
Also, and tie that in on page 11 about comprehensive plans, because this is important. You start with the statutes, and the town has established they want a 5-year planning horizon that balances long-term strategic vision with adaptability to changing community needs and funding possibilities.
Adaptability and funding,
Yeah,
very key. So, yeah.
Okay.
Dylan, how did we come up with 5?
I think you said 5.
Yeah, where did that?
I think I originally proposed 10 and you said 5.
I am not locked in any specific area. So,
This is my client, I have to.
so, well done, by the way. Yeah, well, I'm not locked into any specific number, and keep in mind, this is our first plan.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say 3 years down the road, say we missed something, or something dramatically has changed. We can always open up the document.
And
So, and
Amendments happen.
Yeah.
does the state require an update periodically, if I'm not mistaken? Comprehensive plan, I thought the county goofed and went way beyond what they're allowed in terms of the update rate. So there is a preconceived notion, at least at the state level generically, that they are always updated.
The technical answer is no. So there's kind of ways that the state kind of backs into sort of a requirement, in the sense that communities are required to have a comprehensive plan in order to pursue X funding source from the state level, or the nexus of your comprehensive plan should inform like an update to a land development code, or things of that nature, right? So there's ways in which they're kind of trying to create incentives for a community to keep their comprehensive plan updated. But so, for instance, we just worked with the city of Steamboat Springs, and the last time that they did their comprehensive plan was 2004. They did a minor amendment in 2014, but we just adopted it. Gabby, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, and so really, like, this is their first comp plan in like 20 years. In other communities, I live in the city of Denver. We seem to update our comprehensive plan every 3 years. So,
As you were mentioning, the adaptability might need a little more emphasis, requiring we can update it when we need to.
Yeah. It's a living, breathing, stay fluid document, that's for sure.
And you all amendments are another thing too, where you can, let's say you recognize 1 or 2 things that are important that are worth opening up the document that you want to codify in the plan. You can do that, and it's a much more formal process than hiring us again.
That answers my question.
Yeah.
In general.
Well, if it's okay with you all, just in the interest of time, I'm going to move to section 2, the community vision. So that the plan contents were the Keystone's past, present, and the vision and values. And sort of similar, I had similar questions, which is, what do you like, dislike, anything missing? Could it be better? And what would make it better?
I love the way you approached it, and again, it's good, tight narrative. It reads well to me.
Yeah, I think what's really important was, all the PUDs.
Yeah.
One of the objectives is get a gosh darn inventory of what each one of them is, so we understand what we're dealing with. And you know what, if they're expiring, got an opportunity, we would never know that. So that, I really like that sectional. I think that's going to be very helpful, because that's kind of the third rail here.
And it's 90% of the land in our town limits?
Exactly.
I had no idea.
31.
It's
For
right.
town PUDs?
Yeah. So knowing that, to have like a matrix, here they are, this is when they expire, this is what they allow, they don't allow this, that would be huge to have from a planning.
Yeah.
So as we go forward, we understand what we're dealing with.
we're going to work with our town attorney with regards to the issue of vesting.
Nice. Look at that, you're already taking action on implementing a comprehensive plan. You're adopting it. Okay, but so one thing, I'll just say, like, in the past, present, and vision and values, I was personally pretty happy with that section too. I thought it came up pretty good, but one thing that Lindsay challenged me on that was a little bit more, adding a little bit more information around the reasons behind the appropriation process. Like, but I don't have that context, unfortunately, because I wasn't on the ground with the folks as you all were doing that appropriation. So I think if there's opportunities to maybe get some context from the mayor or others, I think that could help maybe around that section.
The council and the mayor, I think, would be a good start.
I'm working on that.
Cool. Well, community development, so that was land development, land use, zoning, housing, economic development, transportation, and connectivity, probably like the heaviest hitter of the document in terms of content. And yeah, so there's a lot there. We've kind of touched on a little bit of the contents already, but Yeah, what did you like, what did you dislike, what's missing, what would make it better? And I guess maybe also importantly, since this is the Planning and Zoning Commission, the land development, land use zoning, and housing section specifically, do you feel like the way that that plan, the way that the chapters speak, are helping set you all up for success as you're doing things like development review or application review, rezonings, you know, just understanding like the roles in which you all have, is this helpful information for you in the role?
I thought it was helpful, Dylan, and I thought the way this whole section was set up is also really well done and clear. One area, one page I'm trying to, it was on page 35. There, just one specific thing, you talked about updating base zoning. And I thought it would be helpful to like give a short explanation of what that means.
Yep, for sure.
On the PUD craziness, is how I would say, the intensity of it, I'd be more polite. I know there's going to be more information about the specifics of where that data came from with regards to analyzing all the PUDs. I was expecting to see a matrix, maybe I absolutely completely missed it, that talked very simply about the list of PUDs, roughly where they're at now, and the background data. So we could see, if I'm not mistaken, one of the considerations was how many PUDs are already built out. And to get to the idea is how do you manage the number of PUDs? Maybe there are only a couple we have to deal with because maybe 90% of them are already at, you know, totally built out and really pretty much fixed and no real expectation of major changes other than maybe a few attempts to go higher density in certain build outs. I thought there was going to be just a simple matrix that said, here's the PUDs, how heavy duty are they? In other words, prioritizing a little bit on who's the big bag and who's the two houses or one unit on it kind of thing. And then so you can get an idea that, well, that's already built out, that's not going to go any higher density, it's not even allowed to have a higher density, but this one, ooh, yes. But when you popped in the fact that we're already at 90%, maybe makes that less useful, because the hard part is if we annex them, then that number starts changing massively. So I'm kind of torn between having a little matrix with that kind of background of the PUD so people understand that there's a sprinkling of really tiny ones and there's a couple of the monsters. Just to get that kind of feel to some way or another. Is there a good way to convey that?
Well,
Who's
very
big and
fortunate. Jess has done a lot of analysis with regards to build out, and she's looked at every damn PD, all 31 of them, 31 of them. And you're absolutely right. Some of them have not been touched in 35 years,
Right.
40 years.
And
They were literally typewritten, and they're built out. But you can't think of it necessarily in that context that it's done, because they're getting older and redevelopment possibilities do exist. So we kind of got to be somewhat careful with regards to locking, thinking that they're always going to be there, locked in stone.
But there's some that were 35 years in the making and didn't do anything until 2 years ago. And they went from 1 unit to 14. That's the kind of thing I wanted to understand. And that was allowed in the PUD without any change. And what I wanted to understand from a build-out perspective is, are there a bunch of those? Or is that kind of like one or two of those? I wanted to get a feel for who are the big ones and which ones still have a fair amount left over that they could do.
We can talk this somewhere. I just don't want to
Just a
mix
simple matrix.
specific zoning documents into the master.
No.
But certainly an appendice or just for your information.
Just a simple matrix of the list of which one, how many they are, so people get a feel how big they are, and do they allow or not.
Yeah.
It was kind of like a summary of what the county had put together that was outdated.
Yeah, and we have literally the best data we've ever had.
Yeah, thanks.
It exists, but it is not simple.
I understand.
It's definitely
why.
not a simple spreadsheet.
Yeah, and if there's a way to summarize it so we get a feel, so people understand how complex the PUD stuff is, that.
You're gonna reach out to me specifically to remind me, and I already have something that is going in that direction for you.
But Lindsay, are you saying that you're happy to share that with us, but you
Yeah.
don't necessarily want it in this document?
It'd be unusual to actually list
Yeah.
so many.
You wouldn't.
Right.
I think what we, when Jess and I chatted about, I want to give Jess some major kudos because her build-out analysis work is fantastic. So when we chatted, I think it was kind of clear to us that what made sense at the comp plan level was to just talk about, right, what is your current conditions under your current regulatory environment?
That's what I was looking for.
And basically make a baseline acknowledgement that, if nothing changes now, what do you have versus.
That's all I was looking for.
And
I
I think
no
it's-
speculation, just what do we have now?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's all.
Oh, sorry, Melanie.
That's right. Wasn't one of the recommendations in this section to create like sort of a database of the PUDs with all the different information?
Yeah, I think that Jess's build-out analysis is great, but I do think that there's more that can be done to, like, hypothetical example, Jess and Lindsay both leave next month. A lot of that information and the longevity of understanding, what is allowed within the PUDs, that, kind of goes by the wayside. And I think I think it would behoove you all as a town to kind of build a more robust database, especially because of the prevalence of PUDs in Keystone, to have a lot more of like vesting rights and just the, amendment triggers and understanding, certain responsibilities within the PUDs. So just having all of that in a database. And, I don't think that that's necessarily something it's certainly not something we can do as part of this comp plan. I think that's probably its own year-long undertaking that's going to involve, an attorney, a land use attorney, some sort of data scientist. It's going to, and Jess, it's going to take time. But I do think that if you can get that done within the next couple of years, it'll go a really long way
It
for
was one of
creating
our
a
initial
predictable.
conversations when Jess came on board
Yeah.
to develop probably GIS oriented, exactly that. You push on a parcel and you can get a plethora of information, as much or as little as we want to legally
Yep.
offer.
I think I just heard Jess can't buy lotto tickets.
Now, we truly do hope to get there, and.
I didn't expect it here, don't get me wrong. I was just
Yeah,
saying,
it's on
we had a
the,
nice summary of
it's on the
the
to-do list.
background material that was used to provide the paragraph that you put in there. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm gonna give, my sources cited on this is Jess. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Quick, this is more philosophical. So when you make recommendations, like, it'd be great to have a grocery store, great to have a post office, a drugstore, all that. You're identifying them, but should the master plan give some direction how to achieve that? Or is the master plan to identify what's needed and then the different agencies or the town government, they figure out how to do that? Is that?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I think economic development to me is like probably the hardest thing to talk about at a planning perspective, because like realistically, how much can you actually influence about the market, right? Like, if somebody has the development entitlements to go build, let's say, Whole Foods, across the street, the town could say, well, we also want to see a bowling alley, but if they have the ability, if it meets all the legal requirements for them to build that Whole Foods, they have the rights to be able to make that development. So what I think is maybe worth calling out in the comp plan, and I think this is the way we tried to phrase it, was when we heard from the community about what kind of things are missing, like we tried to capture that, and it came up pretty regularly that folks
It's more of a
maybe
question
wanted
for
to
me
see.
to understand a little bit better.
Yeah, well, they wanted to see things like grocery stores or more community serving retail and more restaurants year round. And so I think what's maybe worth capturing at the comp plan level is, so let's say, future development comes online that otherwise meets all the criteria of the underlying zoning, but they're trying to propose a business that feels wildly incompatible with the community. Well, then you all as a planning commission have the ability to go back to the comp plan and say, like, well, what are the types of things that we do want to see here? And then start to work with the developers to say, like, look, well, this is what we actually want to see out of this development, right? Like, we know that from the community, we heard that the comprehensive planning process, grocery store is something that's really important here. And I know you want to build this bowling alley, but is there any way we can also build a retail? Kind of helping meet this need, right? So then it kind of gives you something to fall back on when you go and are reviewing developments down the road, and it gives you something to kind of point to and say, well, this is what we heard, this is what we know is missing. How can you as a developer help us realize this type of investment to meet the needs?
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge here is you have a Keystone totally driven by tourism and skiing, and now you're trying to overlay everyday community on top of that. When I don't mean infrastructure as utilities, but the infrastructure what's there wasn't built there. So you're now limited to where that can go as you show in your plan. So I think one of the things that's important is the 3-mile plan. And I think that's where that stuff can happen. So that was a good part of this that I connected the dots on that. That's an important piece because you may want this, but there's nowhere to go. So, but that's the challenge I think this community has is how do you make that transition? Some of the other communities, they started out as real towns. This didn't per se, but now it needs to be. And how do you do that? That's what this master plan needs to help us figure out.
Yeah.
Overlay districts create significant problems. Oh my gosh. So I think the way you describe how you're going to link a build-out analysis and be somewhat, I'm glad you didn't use this word, but opportunistic with where the corridors need to have more density and where it makes total sense to increase density on a given site in a given context. I think you set it up fine in here for the ultimate implementation. It keeps the door wide open where it makes sense to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is like, because, as you know, Steve, the development community is also paying attention to what, information the communities put out about like what they want to see in their world, right? And so, I think it's important for us to flag like what is important to Keystone in this section so that when, future developers come in and they want to understand, what's important to Keystone, they're also there to read the tea leaves a little bit so that they know how to work with you.
Yeah, they know this use has got a good chance for success because it's in their master plan. They want this. So, yeah, totally good.
Yeah.
I thought you did a nice job, Dylan, all throughout the plan of referencing, continually referencing the community expressed interest in such and such. Our feedback showed interest in such and such. You really weaved that through the entirety of the plan. I thought that was very effective.
I promised your town council that I would do that, so yes.
You did.
Yeah.
It's not invented by somebody.
No, I didn't want it to just seem like it was coming from the for sure.
Yeah. Funny little question with terminology. Oh, Melanie, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just had something specific on page 41. There's a sentence when you're talking about drinking water, and this section says that water is projected to remain in balance, and yet at the end of the paragraph it says, for these reasons, it's critical to make decisions based on system capacity, which seemed a little bit inconsistent because at the one hand you're saying we'll look pretty good with water, and then you're talking about system capacity. So I don't know if that's just a wording issue or if we're missing something.
Yeah, I think that I probably framed that poorly. I think the intention behind that is, even though your current water supply system is relatively in balance now, things could change, and I think it's probably like from a philosophical, good municipal government practice, still something worth considering of like, as growth happens in your community, just making sure that you're continuing to audit infrastructure and utility capacity, which includes water. Especially because, to Peter's point, like in some cases, let's say, a PUD opens up and creates a lot more density than was maybe originally forecasted. Well, then now, right now, a lot of the water forecasting is based on what's within current entitlements and current projections under the existing regulatory environment. But let's say also the Planning and Zoning Commission in 4 years and decides that they really want to overhaul the underlying zoning districts and really upzone Keystone and make it the next Vale or something. I'm coming up with a hypothetical. I'm not saying that will happen, but that's a hypothetical. Then, the projections around, water balance to density ratios under what's within the new regulatory environment at that point might change. And I think we're just trying to, I was trying to express that, like, probably municipal governance to continue to maintain a balance system, but I don't think I described it well.
Building on that thought from Melanie.
It might be as simple as, instead of saying for these reasons, it's like, nevertheless, it's important.
Yes.
It's because I think that would fix it.
That sounds good.
Building on your, Melanie, one additional thought that came to mind when I read that, and also listening to Melanie, was there are characteristics not just of the aggregate available water that absolutely affect water plants. And there's, the contamination of water, the ground, it gets redesignated as affected by surface water, which radically changes what you have to do with regards to chlorination and filtering. There's, new potential fire requirements, because right now we get about 1 day of available for a decent sized large building fire is literally how it's laid out. We may change the fire requirements and the water storage requirements, and therefore, as we're having to do with regards to the fire requirements now, we're already putting in another tank. So there's a lot of, not just the aggregate amount of water available, which is absolutely number one on the list. There's a lot of characteristics of that water, what part of the district is it? Is it available in this time frame? Is it available after power outages for 24 hours, et cetera, et cetera. So each of the water districts have gone through a lot of work with regards to just making sure it's available for 24 hours when a single fire, large scale building happens. Maybe we have to change our wildfire characteristics. So building on your thought is there's a lot of other characteristics other than aggregate water availability that need to be, and that would trigger it. So don't say what I just said, summarize it in one sentence.
I think that's good. I can work with that for sure. I think that's important context. What about housing and transportation? Those are big thorny topics. Do you feel like we generally met the mark on those, or did you like the way we were describing those two sections? Do you feel like anything's missing that could make them better? Anything surprises you that was not included?
I was going to say, I'm good with the housing part. I have some issues with the transportation part in that I think you went into more detail than you should.
Okay.
And I was reading it thinking, couldn't some of this go in an appendix?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that. So, Lindsay and I have had a fun side project going on in addition to the comp plan, which is what we've been calling the connectivity plan, which is really trying to delve deep into the understanding of transportation challenges. One, because I think, it's important. The public realm is a big part of what local governments can influence, and so much of the public realm is transportation. I think a lot of communities don't really realize that when they inherit, like 80% of their public land is, or their owned land is actually like roads and sidewalks. And so, you know, I think, and also understanding how important it was as part of the appropriation process to look at better, you know, safety improvements. So that a lot of the transportation section is coming from a lot of additional attention that was paid to transportation specifically. So that is fully valid that it's probably way too much.
Do you feel comfortable that the work that Dan Sullivan on the commission spent a lot of work to understand what the heck do we have, who has what? This one is owned here, owned by this group and maintained by a different group. There's a lot of complexity in there. Do you feel comfortable that you understand from what he did that that covers most of, and kind of implied he felt like he got a pretty good dent in it, but he was not done? Mm-hmm. Do you feel like what you extracted from his work and your own work is sufficient to cover this funny business having to do with old maintenance, not owned by, but you have to maintain it, and wait a second, I've been doing it, but nobody knows who owns it, that kind of thing? Do you feel comfortable that, okay, I think we got a pretty good handle on it? I couldn't tell.
Gosh, I think that his accounting is pretty good and like a good starting point. I think that was hard to capture in that type of analysis is like where do people actually stand on delivering on their maintenance responsibilities. And I you know, this could open up a can of worms. It's one of those things where it's like, you know, it's one sentence that I'm about to say, but it could be like a ton of headache on everybody's part, which is there might be opportunities now that you're a newly incorporated town to re-look at those maintenance agreements and, you know, get people to the table to like re-iron those out and try and understand like who's responsible for what kind of money goes into.
As Steve mentioned the section having to do with limitations or challenges, I just heard a single sentence that come out of your mouth that belongs in that kind of area having to do with a challenge having to do with ensuring maintenance is actually identified and more importantly executed.
Yeah, and you know, every community struggles with like, you know, they do this, right, with regards to whose responsibility is what to do to maintain this section of sidewalk, whatever. And it's always, what's really tough is municipal government is that for the most part, most people in the community just want their public infrastructure to work and they have no idea who maintains what. And so you will probably be, now that you're an incorporated town, the first line of defense for when people have challenges or issues or gripes with their public infrastructure. And not all of it's going to be within your purview, but I do think it's within your best interest to have a solid ground and understanding and relationship with all of the different people that are responsible for maintaining to be able to like have that solid understanding, especially knowing that you're going to be absorbing a lot and you're actually working more. Yeah. I'm sure Jesse's probably going to be starting getting some of that. Time.
I have a comment on housing, because there's always a comment on housing, but I think there are some very significant disparities here compared to the county as a whole. And that I found it stunning, our reduction in household size, and we're losing families because they can't afford the house here. And at the same time, the 55 plus, and I know I'm on my soapbox about that, but it continues to grow, and you know, these short-term you know, second homeowners, you know, that's going to convert on some basis to more permanent. And so I think maybe you should set out on the implementation and you say, you know, how do we implement per the housing needs assessment, which is a very good title, integration with the housing needs assessment, that these disparities have to be a proactive focus for the town, because you know what? We're not really aging in place. because what happens when you age in place is you eventually die. And so, you know, where is the community, the full-time community growth gonna come from? And, that to me is, how do you focus on community and neighborhood building that will provide a housing alternative? You know, it was really stunning to me to see those statistics spelled out, and I think it would be to a lot of readers here.
Yeah.
In other words, I don't want to ignore it.
I think the housing thing is probably one of the hardest ones, right? I mean, it's also so personal, it's people's everyday lives. It's very important. But, you know, what we can do in the comprehensive plan in terms of my team, the consulting team, you know, we can give you all the tools to understand your housing situation, and we can make policy recommendations about, you know, what choices you want to make. But yeah, I think the housing conversation, my personal opinion is that this is like the start of the conversation, is the comp plan, the housing needs assessment. I think it's going to be a lot of ongoing conversations, because every community in the U.S. has a really tough time. They have a housing shortage right now. For the most part, we've underbuilt for a really long time. And there's a lot of complicated factors that go into it, including the financialization of housing products. And that's, you know, something that's totally beyond the control of the town of Keystone. But, you know, what kind of community do you want to be? What kind of housing products you want to make sure are available? Those are the kind of things that you all can have good conversations about. And I think the comp plan, housing needs assessment, EPS, our economic planning systems, our sub-consultant that worked on the housing needs assessment, I think they did a really good job of breaking down the data in the best way possible. But I think it's going to be a lot of ongoing conversations amongst you, amongst your council, amongst your staff. You know, what kind of policy interventions do you want to make? And that's not easy. So, yeah.
But the implementation champion to be written, okay, so I can't stay out of it. Lindsay, I'm gonna send you some comments on implementation.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's just, there's theory and there's practice, and then there's the risk taker coming to the table to deliver it. And I just think you have to set it up in order to promote it.
Yeah.
So, I will do that.
Oh, Dylan?
Yes.
Yeah, I had a couple places throughout the infrastructure section, there were references to plans to build a sidewalk. And of course, that obviously that language was drafted before, you know, the exciting completion of our first new sidewalk in Keystone.
Right.
I can just include where I noted it. I can put that in my email to Lindsay.
Yes.
But I just wanted to make sure I mention it to you, because it's nice to be able to, that you'll be able to change that to current tense instead of something that we're anticipating doing.
For sure. I actually was really excited driving by it today.
I saw it, yeah, when I made a wrong turn, but you know, there's people really using that sidewalk.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Yeah, the sidewalk is very exciting.
Yeah.
That's a change we're super happy to make.
Yeah, I figured you would be.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we're ready for the next slide.
Yeah. So the last section was on what we're calling community vitality, which was parks, recreation, open space and trails, environment, resilience, and water. And so the reason why we made water sort of its own piece of that is, again, kind of acknowledging some state level requirements. So the state last legislative cycle they're now requiring municipalities in their comprehensive plans to do what's called a strategic growth element, which is mostly just doing a water supply analysis. So that's why we kind of got a little bit in the weeds on water. And so, you know, that information was done in tandem with Scott Price, the Water District, and Andrew back when he was on staff. And so that's why we're kind of calling that out specifically, in part because part of the review of that from the state level is that they kind of just go and make sure that it's in there. So I wanted to make it really obvious that it's addressed. in the plan. So, you know, so they don't really have to do like a bunch of digging, it's just, yeah, they address water.
Did you put a little qualifier? I know you mentioned the 3 different districts that we have, but one of the things would help to enforce your discussion with Scott with regards to that covers like 80, 90, 95%. I don't know what the right number is, but it is an overwhelming majority. But I don't remember reading anywhere in there that said, oh, by the way, these 2 little ones on the side are an extra 2, 3%. Not an issue or there's no issue.
Yeah, I think that's just maybe an
make sure, because you mentioned 3 and then later on they're like, well, what, you talk about the big guy,
yeah.
but not necessarily the fact that how big it is.
Yeah, that's good clarification. We'll add that.
Page 118, Snake River Water District, first paragraph. Using a combination of surface and groundwater sources, Snake River Water District supplies treated water to its service area. It's my understanding there is no surface water component to the Snake River Water District, and it's repeated a number of times in the water infrastructure. It's, I believe, 100% well. I did ask Scott, it's well.
Okay. Yeah, that's
And it
language
kind
I
of
got from
ties-
Scott, so.
The state has some terminology that might help you to understand a little bit. The state says there are groundwater under the influence of surface water,
Yeah.
which is the East Dillon Water District is in that mode, which means you have to do more to treat the water. If it's designated just subsurface water, there's a different set of requirements the state requires with regards to less treatment, less this, less that. So it's important to make a distinction, but you might want to use the terminology that the state uses to help clarify it a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair.
And it ties in later with the stuff about finding the forever chemicals and the well situation and that kind of thing. Is it, pardon my French, a little overreaching for our little town of Keystone to be talking about sustainability and the water system and the ecosystem, and we're gonna help solve it? I mean, we got plenty of problems up to our eyebrows, I think, let alone solving the Pennsylvania mine, which is or is not the source of contamination
Yeah,
in the upper part of the Snake River Basin.
yeah, good question. I guess I would put that back on you guys. Like, what do you think is the right?
My vote is that that's out in the weeds,
Okay.
but that's just my vote.
I actually think that's important. I mean, environmental sustainability and the safety of the environment, I mean, the water, the soil, all the things. Like, I've actually had some pretty long conversations with Scott about the forever chemicals and stuff like that, and it is a lot bigger a problem than I think most people are aware of, so I think mentioning it is fine. I mean, I agree with you, I don't think solving it is,
I mean, we're not going to be
close,
able to duplicate the
yeah.
EPA and
Of course
Superfund
not.
site. This is really getting down in the weeds, but I mean, I had a friend who was a geologist and who said, it isn't the Pennsylvania mine, it's the fact that the mountains that contain the mineral that the miners went after in the Pennsylvania mine, the water that leaches through the mountain and gets into the upper Snake River Basin is the reason for why it's there. That's just an intellectual geology and factoid.
That I wouldn't abandon the idea that even though we may not be able to directly affect certain large-scale things, doesn't mean we shouldn't be aware of them and encourage continuous monitoring, because there were some changes outside of our area that changed the sampling rates and other characteristics that we could do that are very inexpensive or relatively are just normal operation for a water district, but there are that we could use as input to give to others or influence others to affect it. Don't get me wrong, I think the sheer volume of information may be a little appendices oriented, but it may be something, the action maybe we continue or improve monitoring characteristics and look for certain things that are not being looked for or being removed from the list of being monitored by the feds money, therefore the state may or may not be able to do it, therefore we have to decide whether we should pay for $1,000 every couple of months to do a particular kind of monitor, because the Snake River and the one over near my house, near to my yard, Soda Creek, it would would be good to keep an eye on, and maybe we can't solve it directly, but we may be able to influence our representatives, and that being a town has a much stronger voice than an individual.
I agree. I mean, I guess that kind of comes back to that third sphere of influence, right? About like what kind of things can you put out there in the world that you want to indicate as important things to partner on, right? I mean, and there are partnerships out there too that you can start to leverage, or at least, you know, push that you're interested in trying to be an active partner in some of this. So like, you know, for a couple of years, a while ago, I used to volunteer with Trout Unlimited doing water sampling up Clear Creek. I mean, and we would sometimes give those reports to the city of Golden. And you know, I don't know what they did with them, but they didn't really always tell us. We use that mostly because they would, Trout Unlimited would use that for lobbying efforts. But I think, you know, there's partnerships that you can identify too, and if that's something you as a town are indicating that you want.
And there's very active groups in the river basins, like 5 or 6 major groups, and 2 or 3 that are very active and have been able to sway a lot of county money also. So being a voice or have interest and express concern about it is part of the deal, and then conveying information is the other part.
We can't ignore that sustainability, nor can we, just on the geography of it all, ignore the fact that the Snake River is the spine of our recreational opportunity.
I think in some ways this is so, this discussion of how we're one piece of lots of multiple layers when we're talking about water and the Peru and the minerals and mining and all of that. It reminds me of what we've talked about at the beginning of the plan, which with the foundational setup where we were explaining how we're one piece of, there's a much bigger context, we're one piece of a big picture. It's the same sort of thing here with the water. And maybe there's just a couple sentences that could be added that acknowledge that this isn't something for us to fix, but we're a piece of a bigger pot.
Yes,
Yep.
good idea. But we certainly can't ignore it.
Right. And it's good to show that we're aware of it.
Yes.
A typo, I think, on page 120.
Okay.
The district noted that the Blue River is a concern for general
yeah.
water quality.
Thanks. Yeah. Whoops. I must have been daydreaming about catching trout on the Blue River.
I'm in the North Fork of the Snake. There's fish there.
I've heard. I haven't made it on the town.
Dylan, you have more slides, or how are you?
Well, the next slide was just kind of talking about what I see as the next steps, but I know parks, recreation, open space and trails, that, you know, we haven't really talked much about that. Does it feel like it generally hit the mark? I mean, there's, you know, that's definitely a tricky one in some vein, but, you know, there's a newly appointed Trails and Open Space Advisory Board. Do you feel like this chapter can kind of help set them up for success too, is giving them things to be thinking about? You know, I want to make sure that it's kind of speaking across to other entities as well.
Probably to add a little bit of emphasis, maybe I just didn't catch it because I was reading pretty fast toward the end there, that the town itself does not have a lot to deal with in terms of the physics. You covered that. But the fact that we could be an indirect influencer has already shown up when our town council went out and said, hey, don't close Jones Gulch on us, and got the change or the initial steps in the change with regards to the Forest Service, that I would want to emphasize that there are examples already, even as we're a very new town, where we can directly influence and potentially create something like what Ouray has, which is a surrounding system where the town manages the little spikes to get out to the surrounding system, and the Forest Service or other entities at the federal level manage the circular pieces or the outer pieces. That kind of thing is still quite viable. And I don't know if that a third level of influence kind of thing can be actually pretty strong, especially when it comes to the Park Service and Forest Service.
Yeah, the Forest Service does a pretty, I think they have a pretty good working relationship with.
I just see what Breckenridge has done to kind of make that barrier less obvious. In other words, to people who are actually using the facilities and the equipment and the trails.
Yep, I think it's great. I'm happy to have more scaffolding.
I don't know if it's in this section or not, but, you know, of all the things that we have to deal with, the one event that could turn this all upside down is the forest fire mitigation. I didn't get the same, maybe it's me personally, I have a more sense of urgency about that. And I don't want the report to be an alarmist, but I don't know, I'd like to see maybe is there other proactive things we can do to motivate the people that can do something about it in this report. I don't know, it just,
Yeah,
that
partnerships are certainly your friend.
everything we're doing, it doesn't matter if we have a catastrophic event like that, and, you know, keep your stuff in California. Again, I don't want to be alarmist, you gotta stay focused.
I would think that's a candidate for one, in the summary, as being one of the key areas of concern and something to be addressed, because it should reference that environmental hazards and risk area.
Yeah.
But being in the 110th page, it loses a little voice. But just like somewhere, like you said, that hasn't been written yet, that would be a good, really big candidate in my
From
mind.
my house, I look up that slope and I see a lot of dead bodies.
Yeah,
Okay,
you know.
I don't know what the answer is,
partnerships,
just,
yeah.
can we do something, people that can do something, can we help? I'm not saying they're not motivated, I'm not saying that, just, I don't know. I have a more sense of urgency about it.
Yeah, you know, I hear you. It's definitely tricky. I mean, you have a lot of influence on the land you own, right? To do, you know, any wildfire mitigation work that you want. With regards to, you know, private landowners, you have that sort of influence piece, right? And that sort of third level. You know, the state has been putting money behind like grants for private landowners to do wildfire mitigation work on their land. You know, if nothing else, you know, something that could even be like a pretty good win as a sort of a low-hanging fruit, right? Is, you know, having a hub on your website of resources that landowners can take advantage of. And that could be something that could, you know, because there's probably, you know, secondary owners or people that are living in Keystone that maybe don't have a full picture of like what's possible that they could take advantage of. And if, you know, they could get a grant from the state to pay for some wildfire mitigation work, that might be a huge boon for them, especially if you can, you know, let folks know that it might actually help them with their insurance rates too.
I apologize, I didn't read or notice if you mentioned the fact that this county already has a 50-50 joint grant. Was that mentioned in here?
I don't know. I don't think
As
so.
a resource?
Yeah, I don't think it was.
You know, I
But we
think it's
should.
more of an appendix oriented.
Yeah, one place to go.
Yeah.
As just an individual homeowner.
Right.
I just do my own, you know, the boyfriends and the daughters and son-in-laws, you want to come every spring, you come, and you're cleaning up all the dead weather.
Right.
That's
You're being the king. Yeah.
3 loads, and nobody goes to a bar till it's finished.
Yeah, yeah.
We have used both grants to individual homeowners and grants to the HOA as a whole. So the grants actually have supplied a significant amount, and the fact that the county took over what the federal grants used to do and seemed to be well-liked and want to continue that is, I think, an important one, you know, footnote or not footnote, but a section in the appendix.
You know,
I
I
mentioned
think,
that these are the kinds of resources that we should gather, make visible, et cetera. It's not everybody's aware of it.
I do like that idea, I really do. That idea says to let people know there's a place they can go online and understand what's available or what they should or shouldn't do.
yeah.
So,
I can work with Maddie in the interim to put something on the webpage. They'll
Look at that again, already implementing the comprehensive
I tell
plan.
whatever the plan is.
We're
building a plan as we're
with Summit Fire, wildfire group. If you notice,
Yeah,
just put
right
the files
over there.
Yeah.
what we managed to pull off is really kind of remarkable on how much we got addressed. It was partnerships with Vail as well, so, and St. John condos. So I think we could improve on our webpage to point them in the right direction. I don't know.
One advantage, sorry, go ahead.
Two little wildfire questions. One, we're not looking to try and recommend that the town supplement the county shipping and fire mitigation programs that they've been doing for years that most of the, I think, residents know about. But is that something we want to promote or not? And the second thing is, in my mind, talking about the wildfire stuff is not the problem of your house has too much fuels on it and I'm going to burn down because I'm next to you. It's the problem with all of that up there. That
I agree, but if you ignore it and do nothing, I just kind of feel like I'm trying to, my little piece, you're right.
It is definitely a challenge.
And I think
Deal with
the
that on the
report does
federal
address
side.
the stakeholders and the Forest Service repeatedly, saying we want to work with them going forward.
In some ways, the advantage to being next door neighbors with so much Forest Service land is that, I mean, the Forest Service is a great partner. These are people that are definitely aware of the challenges of, wildfire hazards in this area. They have extensive resources. They have the personnel to do it. But, I mean, the downside is, right, capacity is definitely a big challenge for them.
Toward the ranch, they've done extensive work, but it's all driven by funding.
Right. And,
Feds, but our voice in the past, surprisingly enough, came from Vail or Rolston Green back then,
right,
where they did large-scale mitigation that helped the branch mitigate large-scale areas. So if you haven't been back there, you may not even notice the fact that how much they've taken out in that valley. And I would like to encourage that kind of thing, the same kind of conversation, not coming just from Vail now to protect the main resource, i.e. the ski mountain, but also to protect the resources of the town.
yeah.
And how nicely it's replenishing. It's really attractive landscape.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's gone crazy.
It sounds like from this discussion, starting with Steve's original suggestion, that we want maybe just a little bit more, a set paragraph or focused on wildlife mitigation in the plan to show that we realize how important it is, with some of these suggestions for things that could be done to help people work on mitigation factors. And even if Lindsay's able to start posting things on the website already before the plan gets issued, it'd still be good to have it in the plan.
And it is the essence of community vitality.
Yes, true. Yeah. Well, in terms of what I see as next steps, incorporate all the feedback I heard from you all today. I actually have a really nice week next week where most people I work with are not working, but I am working. So I have like a pretty good block of focus time. So incorporate all the great feedback I heard from you all tonight. Then discussing the feedback that we heard with town council, and then releasing the plan for public comment. So hearing what the public has to say, putting it out there, having a survey that people can provide their input on. And then writing the plan implementation chapter that kind of gives you your roadmap, right?
Yeah.
And then incorporating all the public comments and then going to plan adoption. And that, I think that's probably a couple of months worth of things. So probably looking towards January, early February for adoption, but that's kind of the roadmap.
My best guess right now is February.
So,
Executive
the
summary.
one part.
the executive summary as well. Yeah, that's
Where in there?
right after. Let's add that right after. Yeah.
After you get comments.
Let's write out that after incorporating all of the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, my personal take on executive summaries is like, that'll be the last thing we should write, because once all the other information is, we feel really good about it, then we'll know what information can be
I would
transposed.
assume before it goes to public comment.
Good, what do you guys
I
think?
would prefer, after you're gonna get, people who can read a page or two, and you're not gonna get, you'll get, look at 110 pages and they don't see a summary, you're gonna get 1/10 reaction from the public.
Yeah, here's
So I would
another,
suggest before that,
here's another question for
a
you.
draft of it.
So, in another plan we just did, we had, the Word version was like over 100 pages, so one articulation. And Word is a great program for writing, but it is a terrible, trust me, it's a terrible program for like laying out and like adding images and tables integrated within text. So when we transpose this to InDesign, I imagine that, so this other plan, it cut the page down to like 65. So do you think that there's advantages to us before we go to public comment to try and get a more stylized version that is the shorter pages and that has closer to the layout? Or do you think that it's easier, I mean, it's certainly easier and less work on our end to try and just put a PDF of a Word version out for public review? But if you think that there's serious, gains that we could be had by putting in a more, better looking stylized version that's a lower page count,
Yes.
then we can be open to that too.
Yeah. Dylan, just also, in terms of the order, wouldn't we want to do the implementation chapter after we get public comments?
That's a good point.
It seems like that could be flipped.
Yeah, I'm open to that. What do you all think?
Because we have no idea if the public comments are going to, well, we don't know obviously what their impact will be on it. And then I would just, it seems to me like for implementation, we want to have it be after public comment, so we're closer to final in terms of what we know we want to do.
Yeah.
There's an expectation when you go to the public with something and ask for their comments that it's close to being done. In other words, we're expecting input for, tweak this, add that, or whatever. Not you're missing whole pieces of fundamental things. So if you don't, you're going to have a difficult time trying to convince people to or to make them understand that this doesn't have an implementation plan. Somehow that's not going to go over well with a lot of the public in my mind. I mean,
Sure.
not having even if it is just lightweight draft or qualified or however you want to do it, saying, here's our first draft, this is one area we really want more input on, that's fine. But not having anything in there is, I don't think, a viable approach.
I think you definitely have to have an executive summary presented.
Yeah.
And the implementation plan, it doesn't have to be as extensive as it ultimately, I'm assuming will be, but I think you need to have almost maybe even just in a PowerPoint format at this point, these implementation bullets that are still being, you're working through those subject to public input. But you have to show that there is definitely going to be an implementation work plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it is, here's the topics of of what we're in the implementation. Keeping it high level is fine. But having nothing that's going to create a vacuum of, what are you doing with all our money? You don't even have a plan to get it done.
Yeah.
I can imagine the feedback not being all that fun.
Well, for example, here's a comment I can totally foresee. Let's just say we don't have an implementation chapter. A comment we get could be, well, this is all nice and great, but how is the town actually going to do any of this?
Yeah.
We get that comment. I've gotten that comment many times before. But so that could definitely be a comment that we get. The flip side of it is the implementation chapter is kind of an interesting one. It can always look a little bit different in terms of like different plans, right? It's a matter of like what kind of information is best communicating to the people that are going to be responsible for actually implementing the work. I sometimes think about implementation chapters and like the rest of the content as like a front of house versus back of house situation. Like the implementation section to me is a little bit like the back of the house stuff, right? It's sort of the sausage making. It's like what the how piece. And my experience is that like for the most part, people are not really paying as much attention to the implementation section as much as making sure that they feel like the sentiment is reflected accurately in the plan document itself. But again, I also acknowledge that like a comment that we might get without, in absence of anything acknowledging implementation would be,
I would say,
how we do this.
Well,
take the first step at it and not necessarily be down to obnoxious details, because that has to be implemented through council and staff work anyway. And they're gonna figure out what the nuts and bolts are. And that doesn't belong necessarily in a detailed, publicly reviewed draft. That's something we do incrementally. We carve off a piece and tackle it. And if we need to change, then we change. The staff gets redirected, or the council says we need to do X, Y, Z first. Fine.
I mean, it sounds like that everyone is sort of coming to a consensus that we want it looking as being as complete as it can be and looking as good as it can be before we go out for public comment. And it also, it strikes me then too, that we've got to remember it's the first time the public is seeing a document from us. It's obviously this huge, massive thing. We don't want it, their first impression to be, oh my God, it's 128 pages of text. So I think in that sense, if we're going to go with the executive summary and we're going to have implementation, at least in terms of a broad brush, we should have it look good then too. It will help people, it will help more people review it. We would then get better feedback because we'll have more, it'll be a more inviting document for people to look at.
Yeah, I think that's point well taken, for sure.
Pictures and exhibits, yeah, to your point, it just shoot a narrative draft out.
Just in terms of attention span.
Yeah.
More to, it's a little less dense, yeah.
I mean, it isn't, just to read it is a 3-4 hour production.
And you all are the interesting members of the public that chose to get involved in planning stuff.
Yeah.
Take your time to read all this, so, not everybody in the public that has
That's the
that.
time.
We're all
to do
planning
that.
things, of course we are.
Otherwise, we gotta give out more free
Do
copies.
you envision that we're going to
I see
review
a
this?
Tom over there who has them. My buddy is here.
One more time, 2 more times before we're going to public comments? Or are we not?
Yeah.
Is this our one and done shot
No.
at reviewing this?
No, in fact, it's kind of a good segue. So what's going on behind the scenes is Jess and I have reviewed it. We are compiling our comments. I want the town manager to also review. I think it's very important to garner his input as well. And quite frankly, I have not had the conversation yet, but on some level, I think it is appropriate to allow our town attorney to also weigh in
Sure.
Absolutely.
for it. So there's a lot going on, and Dylan and I have also talked, this is probably going to be part of the public comment part, that we want to do a reach out to some extent with regards to the stakeholders, and really try to get that plan to them, just to make sure, this is where we're at. Do we capture what was important to you as well?
So the end part of my starting question is in the next iteration, is it possible to somehow highlight that we saw this on November 20th, here's the changes that happened in between, rather than having to read all 140
Yeah.
pages?
Well,
Like that.
We'll make it pretty evident, either through strikeouts or
Thank you.
or we'll make it as evident as we can, highlight things. Which brings me to the question that it's a little odd, but our next meeting would be December 18th.
Right.
What are we, number one, I realize how close it is to the holidays. Is there availability, and Dylan, do you think we would utilize that meeting with P&Z?
I mean, we could,
Tell you what, I apologize for putting you
Yeah.
on the spot a little bit there. What is the availability for the December 18th? Let's start with that.
Here.
Here. All right, so-
Here.
I have,
All right.
I have to call it.
Here.
But I-
No, all right. Tentatively, let's plan on the 18th, but if we're not there, I mean, I don't want to waste your time. But with that being said, I also want to keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
So I will be in touch very soon whether or not we'll have a December 18th meeting. I sincerely appreciate you guys being able to potentially go that day, given the holidays.
It would be nice, I mean, even just whatever changes have been made by then, just because it will be more fresh for us to see it just in 30 days.
It's a sharp,
A
Yeah,
quick
it's-
check.
touch base. I think you
Even if you're not totally done with it, perhaps even a second draft would be fine.
Yeah,
I did that.
Again,
Everybody.
the way I look at it is
It's
another opportunity, and this is out there on the web, to garner some, public input. And we're gonna start picking up the pace with the reach outs again.
I just have a question on process. So once we get the public comments in, we get the village attorney, village manager, and then we make does it come back to us and then we all in favor say aye? I mean, is that?
Yeah, you'll
is that-
adopt
We will adopt and then that goes.
in
to
a
town
public
council.
meeting setting. We'll have a resolution of approval for you, and we'll probably have a separate one for town council. That's my guess. I need to have that talk with
Okay,
the town attorney with regards to
So
that, but yeah.
we'll go on record.
Procedurally, there'll be a resolution adopting the plan,
Okay. Okay,
and it'll be exhibit to that resolution.
thank you.
Yeah.
Dylan, I guess, is it time for us to thank you once again for all your hard work and just a really fantastic job writing and putting together this app? Yeah, definitely. Really a beautiful product.
Yeah, well, thank you all. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness, your attention, your time. Yeah, it's huge.
And you want us to listen to them?
Well, I know, and I've told Lindsay that I actually enjoy coming to talk to you all. Like, I really do. Yeah, you guys are very thoughtful.
Which
Appreciate
one?
You are a pleasure, Patrick.
You are seriously a
You're a good man,
wonderful.
Charlie.
Is that a prerequisite for choosing planning?
I think it has to be, right? It seems to be.
It's a class you take, right?
Do we have anything else on our agenda?
The next item on the agenda is whether we have any other business or reports. Is there anything anyone wants to bring up?
Bills are winning.
I think if not,
I
that
just wanted
concludes.
to thank Dylan in front of, when he had to handle the housing section in front of the town council. I was impressed and grateful that one, it wasn't me, but it was you. And you handled it well. So thank you for that non-trivial amount of work when you were living in a slight vacuum of data world. How do you handle it? So went very well done.
And the circle back that we did worked very, very well. And
Yeah.
Brian, from the housing portion of it,
Definitely.
it was really, really well done.
Made a lot of progress in 2 months.
Yeah.
It's great.
And I don't want to jinx it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to jinx it.
Yeah.
Okay, then. I think that concludes our agenda for today. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. I think our meeting then is officially adjourned. Thanks, everybody, and thanks again, Dylan, especially to you and the team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone.